So I'm sitting in the law office with Trevor Owen. This is the first time I get to sit here and talk to you, Trevor, in a very long time. I've enjoyed speaking with you in the past about so many great things that you do in the community. It's nice to finally sit down and talk to you.
Happy to be here, Kevin.
Well, it's your office. So Trevor, we're going to do so many things here with you because you are so heavily involved in the community, and your father has been such an inspiration to you too as well.
Yes.
So, Trevor, tell me a little bit about you growing up in this city first.
Well, I attended Hillcrest Public School and Shanty Bay Public School. And I went to Central Collegiate, because there was then a Central Collegiate.
Yeah.
Miss it very much.
Yeah.
And then after that, University of Toronto, Cambridge University in the UK, and Queen's. So.
Oh, you went to the UK?
Yeah, I have a master's degree from Cambridge University.
Well, that's not a small accolade, is it?
It was one of the most interesting years of my life.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, at what point, let's say as a child, did you ever have this ambition to want to be a lawyer, or was it something that drove you from where?
Actually, I remember being at Central and the guidance department, and they said I could only be really good at certain things: law, social work, being a minister, or a teacher. And so when I went to university, I thought, well, let's try academia. Well, that's why I did that master's degree at Cambridge in international law, international relations. And that's when I realized that if I don't have a lot of immediate pressure, sometimes I will procrastinate. And I knew from my father being a lawyer that law is full of daily pressures. And so I thought, this is probably, academia is not the right thing for me because I won't be as useful as I otherwise could be. And so I applied to law school, got a 97% or something in the LSAT.
Wow.
Got a scholarship to go to Queen's, so off I went to Queen's, and the rest is history.
Well, your comment there, to be more useful, is such a great term, right? For it to be more useful to the people of the planet and to the people in our community.
Yep.
And again, going back to your father, Bruce, who's been a huge inspiration to you,
Yes.
What's it like growing up with a dad who's a lawyer? It's kind of like growing up with a dad who's an accountant or something, right? Like there's a certain bookkeeping sort of aspect, right?
I wouldn't say bookkeeping. My father has done a lot of things in law, including a number of key trials. And for example, I remember growing up in Barrie, and he had one point had to be an acting Crown attorney when the Crown attorney had a heart attack.
Oh.
And so he put a fellow away in jail, and he escaped. And he had vowed to kill my father and all our family.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And,
Wow.
and he got all the way to the corner of Ann and Dunlop Street here in Barrie. And myself and at least one of my sisters were in school at Hillcrest. And we were pulled from school. We were put in our house on Castle Drive, and the police were there, but they caught him, as I said, not too many blocks away. So that was an interesting memory.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that. That's incredible.
And so you think, well, not everybody's going to love you as a lawyer, but you're making an impact.
Yeah.
And hopefully for the better.
Now, your chosen field of law, criminal lawyers, that's a whole other world I could never imagine. Because those people who have to defend Bernardo or defend some of those other really awful cases are the things you don't want to ever imagine having to do.
I do not do that.
No. You are in family law.
Family, wills, and estates, death and divorce, all the fun stuff.
Death and divorce. Fun. So let's
Trauma
go.
City.
Well, before we build up to that, where did you get your first oomph then to want to be a lawyer? Like, was there something that you saw? Like, how did that not scare you to not want to be a lawyer?
Well, it's not just that my dad's a lawyer. It's that he ran 8 times for the Liberal Party in Barrie.
Yeah, I knew that.
All right. And seeing Owen signs up most years of my life growing up, back in those days, my dad was able to collect up to 1,000 people to volunteer in a campaign.
Amazing.
Which hardly happens for any party anywhere these days. But,
and that was back when there was only 50, 60, 70,000 people in Barrie, slowly growing.
Even slightly younger than that, smaller than that. So it was really quite a sense of collegiality, a real sense of coming together for a cause.
Yeah.
And I've always thought, be it in terms of Christian faith, be it in terms of politics, be it in terms of the law, being something bigger than who you are yourself as an individual gives value and meaning. It gives parameters and structure. It gives an impetus. There's a dynamic to being involved in those things. And that's incredibly attractive and intoxicating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's that whole ethical aspect of it too, and the drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your community involvement is not just politically.
Oh, no.
You've been heavily involved with the arts.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the arts and music? And
Well, sure. In terms of the arts, my father would call my late mother and I, remember my mother just died 3 weeks ago.
yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, it's a loss. Loss is a loss for everybody, no matter how much faith you have. But he would call my mother and I the great unwashed. Because we weren't as into music as much as he was, but he would routinely, for all his concerts and the material for his concerts, run his ideas back by my mother and myself. And we would give feedback because while we were aware and appreciative of the various musical genres out there, we weren't quite as into it or as refined as he was. So if we were sort of intrigued or thought something might be interesting, he knew it might generally sell well or do well for the general public.
Sure.
And so in that area, as in so many other areas, I've been my father's sidekick. And sure. So like last Saturday night, we had something in Barrie called That Choir, led by a Newfoundlander named Craig Pike, who did some amazing music. My dad asked for 2 selections, the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B from the Andrews
I love
Sisters.
that, yeah.
And they just had the women singing, and it was stellar. And he also asked them to do Abide With Me, which is an extraordinary Christian hymn, and particularly in the light of my mother's late passing, very meaningful, very soothing, reassuring. And because music does that to people.
As it should.
It hits the soul.
Well, they say it soothes a savage beast, right?
Well, even lawyers. And,
and lawyers, no.
It happens that way. Maybe that's why my father's been twinned with the law and music all his life. And I've been sort of along for the ride.
Yeah, well.
And sure. So the arts, my father currently does 50 concerts a year for producing, presenting those. And he also still sings a bit. So I've been along for that, but I've done a variety of other things as well.
Awesome. And so you haven't exactly been shy about the fact that you have a Christian faith as well, too. So
Correct.
you find that does that influence you in your daily work, or do you find that you kind of have to have your faith and then your books?
No. I think when one divorces or tries to separate faith or one's worldview in any area from what one does, one ends up in confusion, hypocrisy more than the norm, and mental, emotional turmoil.
Yeah.
When one tries to integrate one's worldview with whatever one is doing, one has more wholeness. One is more centered, one is able to present oneself and achieve goals that are consistent with what one's trying to do.
Nice.
So I think that's true for any worldview, as I believe the Christian worldview is the one I believe to be personally effective and indeed true. I do indeed try to do that. Now, of course, people say, well, you're a lawyer.
But it's okay, because it helps you to stay centered.
Honestly, I could not have done 28 years of litigation without having some solace, some peace of mind to retreat into to help withstand the slings and arrows of emotional toxicity, which is what happens in litigation.
And I think part of what you're doing when you are Christian is there's a certain sense of peace that you try to bring into each case too, which is part of, not just settling, but it is more in the, let me give you an opinion from your, faith as to maybe why somebody should be maybe settling something or should maybe put more heart into what they're trying to work through.
You have to be careful with that. Some people want to hear more chapter verse Christianity if they're a Christian themselves.
Well, yeah.
If they're not, they don't, and you have to respect that.
Yeah.
But the point is, there are usually principles that arise out of a faith perspective that you don't have to quote chapter and verse, but you can say, here's a principle, what do you think of this principle?
Principles are important.
And then people can sort of wrap their minds around the principle and say whatever they want to say, and that usually gets you moving along.
Yeah, and that makes sense. That's
does.
all part of getting that ball rolling, because I think one of the old terms that I learned a long time ago was not everybody who wants to settle wants to split an orange in half. Somebody may want the peel, somebody may want the pulp. And part of what you're doing in your mediation and you're trying to get somebody to go through with getting things done is finding out what their wants and needs are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now you're also not shy about your political your political drive, and that's good, because everybody has an opinion on politics, right?
Yes.
And those who don't, maybe they just haven't learned what's going on in the world yet. But you are not shy about being a liberal.
Correct.
Okay, so let's get into that just for a few minutes, because you watched your dad campaign. Your dad was a part of the political community in town.
Still is.
Yep. And
he's currently still president of the Provincial Liberal Association.
and you currently still have a drive to be a part of that and community involvement.
Absolutely.
In politics.
Yeah, I've campaigned in almost every election since 1977 when I was a kid.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So what's that like when you have to campaign? And I know what it's like for, I've witnessed other, some of the greats here in the province of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, and I've watched Mike Harris campaign, and you watch different people campaign in different ways. What do you find is the most difficult part of campaigning? Is it, trying to sell the people that you're somebody that people can trust and that they like, or do you find that it's hard, the defeat?
Well, defeat's never fun,
No.
And to be a Liberal in Barrie means you experience your fair share of it.
Yeah.
We win about a third of the time. That means we lose about 2/3 of the time.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a certain sense of shared suffering when it arises out of fighting the good fight and often losing cause.
Yeah.
And because you are doing what you do out of principle, not because you can get anything out of it.
Yeah.
And so that has a certain hallowing effect. But you do, politics, raising money I always find painful.
It is hard to ask people for money.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so I have always disliked that intensely, even though I've had to do it from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm particularly good at it, but I've done it.
Yeah.
So I don't like doing that at all.
Mm-hmm.
I actually like canvassing indoors.
It is nice to meet the people, isn't it?
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are rude, but most aren't. Most appreciate that you're giving up your free time to talk to them about issues that matter.
Because you haven't got the job yet. That's the thing, is you're not getting paid for being at their door. You're hoping that they like you, and you're not just telling them what they want to hear. You're there because, from what I've learned about you, is you're very politically oriented, and you have a political background.
Yep.
And what's different than a lot of politicians nowadays is they can campaign like crazy, but they don't have that political skill. And so what happens is they get elected, but it's a lot of campaign broken promises, right?
That's partially true. There's always people that don't have much of a history with political involvement, and then make what could be called rookie mistakes.
Yeah.
Talking about cases that are in front of courts when you shouldn't be. Taking money from possible would-be contributors and not realizing that there's rules that limit or prevent certain kinds of donations.
Sure.
And those happen decade after decade.
Yeah.
And so not necessarily because people are malevolent, they're just unaware.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people are not doing things properly, but I think as much as people doing things when they're not aware of the problems that are out there.
Sure. So let's go to Trevor the lawyer for a little bit here, and we're going to unpack this a little bit. So what is it like for you on a daily basis? Do you find that you have a daily struggle, or are there certain cases that affect you that maybe you have a hard time with?
Sure. One of the most problematic cases I ever had is that I represented a fellow who tried to get his niece by marriage, a teenager, a 16, 17-year-old, drugged, and have his wicked way with her and film it for a porn film. Now, he got drunk and nothing actually ended up happening. And of course, needless to say, his wife, that kind of ended the marriage. And the kids pretty much didn't see him thereafter. So what does a Christian lawyer do in a situation where there's so much repugnance? And the answer still is, there are a couple of things that still merit involvement. One is the property division. Just because he did all this doesn't mean he should end up with nothing.
Isn't that so different than in the United States? Because they do things very differently down there, where infidelities in other parts of the world, infidelities can be a big part and a contributing factor on a case. And nowadays in Canada, more specifically, it's not a bearing factor, is it?
No. I'll talk about that for a second.
Sure.
Prior to 1968, you had to have basically an act of parliament to get divorced. Mm-hmm. Then from 1968 to 1984, we had something called fault divorce.
Okay.
And we discovered in that 16 years that pretty much everybody thought the other person was at fault.
It's true. It's so
very true.
Yeah.
And so people were spending more time pointing the finger at the other person than getting anything meaningfully done, and it was making things worse, not better.
Just trying to prove fault.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so from 1984 forward, we mostly have no fault divorce because fault divorce made things worse.
Yeah.
And it's a free society, and it generally is. Mm-hmm. People don't have to stay together if they don't want to.
Yeah.
Forcing people who are hating each other to stay together just brings about other problems. And so you can encourage people to stay together. Mm-hmm. You can give them counseling. Counseling often is helpful because no relationship is without challenge.
I don't believe people want to get married with the anticipation of it not working.
Entirely right.
Yeah.
That's never happened. I think people have great ideals, and then for 1,000 different reasons, those ideals get smashed. Mm-hmm. And so they end up in a place they never think they would. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of reasons why.
So when you are sitting there and you have somebody who's beside you, and I don't like using the term gold digger, but let's say you've got a woman beside you or even a man, and I've seen it more often than not too, that maybe there's a man who's married into a family and the woman's family has a lot of money and he feels he's got a certain entitlement. Or you've got a man who maybe doesn't even want to be around his children, a woman who's doing the same things. What is it like for you then to try and give them some advice when it's maybe being rejected? How do you feel going into court knowing that everything behind you is just for show?
I think the thing is, when I tell people the advice I give, it's usually based on legal principle and case law and the statutes. Mm-hmm. And if they are willing to live with those principles, then we continue. If they don't want that approach, then often we part company. Now, the vast majority of people that I've seen over the years go with the advice I give. Mm-hmm. So I have very rarely had somebody depart because they want to do something I wasn't prepared to do.
Yeah.
But has that happened on occasion? Yes. And they can go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So if there are things that I think they're asking for that make no sense, I will tell them because I won't do that. Mm-hmm. End of story.
So you find then that you can give them, there is sort of a legal skeleton then of what to sort of expect and not expect, and then there's the other things of, the sort of muscle and meat that is the, these are your wants, these are your needs, and here's what you're kind of hoping for.
I have frequently said to people that any case in any area of the law, it's an evidence-based proceeding. Mm-hmm. And if you want to have the best results, you better make sure you have the best evidence. Mm-hmm. And that usually means documents and reports.
Documentation, yeah.
And if they don't have the evidence, then the odds of them getting something beyond that are very, very slim. Mm-hmm. Because a judge isn't going to do that. Yeah. A judge has to go with the evidence. And there's something called the best evidence rule. Mm-hmm. That if he or she has the best evidence on any given topic, that's usually where a judge is going to go. Mm-hmm. And so that's what you have to tell people.
Makes sense.
And if they can focus on that, they'll do better. And if they can't, they won't.
And that makes sense.
And that's all really a good lawyer can do.
Yeah. So then let's sort of go back to something here, because you had brought up, one of the worst things you've ever had to represent. Now, yes. Can you give me an example of maybe some of the best points, some of the best things you've been able to do, some of the things that you can come home and just, smile about?
There's lots of those.
Good.
Yeah, lots and lots. Sometimes somebody is having no access, and you sort of get the therapeutic counseling in place, and you line things up and get I remember one particular case, a guy had been out of his kid's life for something like 7-8 years, and we had a therapeutic counseling, and the mother thought, there's no way this boy was ever want to see this guy.
Sure. And
it turns out the 8-year-old had always been curious. What happened to my dad?
Yeah.
What's he really like? Why hasn't he been around?
And that's so important, because when you think about it, imagine being a child sitting there wondering about your father or your mother who's, disappeared.
Yes.
And they want to come back in. You're going to have questions, and you should be entitled to having those answered and spending that time with your biological parent.
If the kid is ready for it, and in this case, the kid was, and much to everybody's surprise, reconciliation happened and he ended up having regular access. Now, there are other occasions where too much has happened. There's been a tipping point where access is no longer feasible because it's traumatic. It's like picking a wound or a scab every time for the child. So in those scenarios with those individual histories, not so much.
Yeah.
I can recall other scenarios, another one just this past week, where the fellow said, I need to have a regular alternate weekend access with my child. And we said, well, you're an alcoholic. No, I'm not, he said. And so we ended up having him have a breathalyzer with him during access times, and 3 times on the weekends he has to blow, and it's done in real time, and there's a computer connection to a computer in Muskoka.
Wow.
And if the guy blows over, we know there's a problem, and my client can go and get the kid, and the access is finished. And so this guy, every so often, still, so a week or 2 ago, blows it, and or doesn't pay his bill, and there's no testing, which is usually suspicious. And so there's a situation where something's been set up to make sure the guy's sober.
Good.
And that the child is not in danger.
And that makes sense, of course, too.
Of course it does.
Because again, I think there are people who go into a court case and they're so busy about trying to, maybe look like the better. They want to win. They want to look like the better parent.
Yeah.
They want to do all kinds of things because maybe on social media, and we'll get to that in a second too. But maybe they want to appear just the best of the best. But really, they're, child support is a struggle for a lot of people. It really is. It can devastate a family.
Yes.
There are big expectations on that. There's that access time is also it can change a child, and people have to remember that there are things that are all about the child, and at that point they have to put down the anger and vendetta, and think about the child.
Anything that's custody access related, child support related, the number one principle is the best interest of the child.
Now, what sort of volume of your cases do you find involve children as well, too? Is it a majority of them involve the children?
Yes.
Well, it's funny because statistically, the millennials are having less children, right? And so not only the millennials, there are more and more families that have chosen to only have one child or none. So it'll affect the world's population, which is a good thing, right? In a natural way, without death. But it's funny because you're going to probably have more and more cases that are now just about 2 parties and about, the financials and houses and things like that than it will be about custody and access, hopefully.
I don't know. I think you hit it closer to the mark. Instead of talking about 5, 6 kids, you're talking about 1, 2 kids.
Yeah.
And either way, you still have that component. The case I have later today is a fella that's doing very well, and has accumulated a house in downtown Toronto and a cottage in Muskoka and a chalet in Blue Mountain, and has a Lamborghini and a Mercedes, and says he's only making $200,000 a year. He's done that all in the last 4 years. So we're saying he's making a little more money than that, should be paying a little more support than that.
Yeah.
And so we'll see how that case goes in about an hour or 2.
Now, do you find, and I don't even really need to ask it because it's a fact, and it's that whole aspect of social media, it's too easily accessible for somebody to flirt, poke, say hello, create a contact, find an ex, men and women do it both, and there's that unfortunate infidelity, or there's the emotional infidelity of cheating between 2 people communicating online.
Yeah.
You're seeing an increase, I'm sure, in social media being a major factor.
Yes. Like a number of experts out there that are much more high-tech oriented than I am, I'm not a huge fan of social media. I tell anybody who will listen, you put anything on the internet, it's probably there forever for anybody to pick at later.
Yeah.
So be careful with whatever you say and anything that's on the internet, because it's there for review.
Well, I remember seeing a meme not long ago, and it hit the nail on the head, and it said, XYZ guy just added a beautiful woman. His wife already hates her. And it's so true, because all you have to do is like the wrong photo, or you say hello to somebody, and you're already creating something.
Well, let me give you a very vivid example. A couple of years ago, I had a case, and the couple broke up, and the guy on his Facebook page had a picture of a woman in a garbage can, obviously dead, probably murdered, and said, "I would like to do this to my ex."
Oh no.
So my client, shall we say, was underwhelmed by that and a bit fearful. So I had to call the Barrie police and say, "You should at least talk to this guy." And indeed they did.
That's hateful.
And because they said, keep this up, this could be some kind of a charge, right? Be it a stalking or uttering threats. You're getting close to that if you continued in that direction.
Yeah.
And this particular fellow took that message seriously and stopped doing that. But it's a scary thing.
It is scary. And I've seen people post things on social media of, my ex is a deadbeat dad, I wish he would pay stuff. And they forget about the fact that maybe they've got mutual friends, and this is tough. Like, they never tell the other side of the story, and that's not right. That's not your forum to tell who's doing what.
People vent too much, and...
But that's the draw, right? That's one of the draws on people. There are those little trolls that just love it.
Yes.
And that's what they are. They're the trolls that sit there waiting for scraps and go, "Oh, did you hear what this guy did?" And it's like, wow, why don't you just have a conversation?
Yep. We too easily in society label people, put them into good camps, bad camps, try to dehumanize. When we're all made in God's image. We all have individual value. One of the core tenets of political liberalism is that every individual has infinite value.
Yeah.
It's the individual in society that is your core political unit, not the group, not the society as a whole. It's the individual. And certainly in the area of law, keeping in mind that every case is individual, with every individual facts, individual facets, that keeps it fresh. But it's very healthy, and I think it's real. And so the less we demonize each other, the less we categorize each other, and then realize that we do have far more things in common than we have things that are apart.
It's the human way.
It's the healthy way. I think it's a Christian way. I think it's a politically liberal way. I think it's a whole bunch of good things. But people will maybe come to that conclusion and express it in different language.
Well, there's all those different colors of M&Ms, but if you think that we're all different in that way, but we're all still exactly the same at the end of the day. We really are.
Yeah, we're all a little bit of a nut.
Yeah, may contain nuts. So, or hollow. So, my next question then is, we got to wrap this up shortly, but I want to ask you this, and I know it's important because you've got this beautiful family, right? Yeah. What's it like for you when you come home at the end of the day? Do you find that is your happy place? Is that your comfort then? You've got a son and you've got a wife. Is that where you find your solitude then when you come home? Will you find, or not solitude, your comfort?
Sure, it's a comfort. It's sometimes a challenge, but mostly it's a comfort. And so sure, I live in Oromadonti, where I've lived most of my life for the last 40-some years. And there's a lot to be said for the lake, the forest, the natural beauty of creation that calms the soul. And so that's another part of that. So family, yes. Nature is another.
Yeah.
I have a daily quiet time. I read the Bible every day and have a bit of commentary. And that daily refreshes my mind. It sort of gives me new perspective and new insight. I am repeatedly struck at how that little few minutes a day reorients me. And so I find all those kinds of things allow me to keep on going.
Awesome. Well, I encourage you to keep on going because I love your message and I love how strong you are. This is so great to have finally had the time to sit and talk to you, Trevor. Thank you for being a guest on my show.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Pleasure.